All right, let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. How are we doing today? Welcome, welcome. Today we're going to, I just have a couple of final things to say about sessions, particularly login sessions, and also changing the login session ID and why that's a good idea. And then we will be on to our next topic, which is databases. So, why is that published? It shouldn't be published. There we go. So, we're going to see first-hand experience that even humble PHP is a better interface to a database than Microsoft SQL Server Database Management System. So, but first, let's talk about logins. So, the login session is a very specific type of session. It's also extremely common. It's worth talking about it explicitly for a few moments. So, given what we've seen of sessions so far, you could be forgiven for thinking that the way we handle a session that's for a login, when the user successfully logs in, we issue a session, right? The start session code is a part of the login check, right? However, in many cases, this isn't what's actually done in practice. I would like to call up the example of the Amazon order. So, question. When you order something off of Amazon, when do you provide your login details? Sorry? When you are about to pay. That's right. Amazon does not require you to enter your login credentials while you are shopping. Why? Why wouldn't you need to log into Amazon to start shopping?
They're using late fee registration as an interface so that you can get as much feature access to the web.
Right. So, it helps with a number of things, right? Number one, it helps with search engine optimization. If you are, if all of your item pages are behind a login wall, a sort of web combing bot will not be able to get in and see what the items are. Therefore, the items won't show up in search results, therefore, undesirableness. Yes?
Also, I don't know about you guys, but the fastest way to make me stop using the website is to make me have to create an account before I can look at anything on it.
Yes. Well, one of the interesting things about Amazon is that the login, you can actually place an order as a guest without a permanent login as well. Not everybody wants to log in. So it is, however, undoubtedly a session that's going on, right? You are preserving the status of your Amazon cart between multiple page loads. That data is persistent for a couple of days, I think, if I'm recalling correctly, although, check my math on that. But the, you have a session established. That's where your data from your cart is being stored, but it's not a validated session, right? So a way that a lot of these larger more thought through websites do things, rather than have the login and the session be sort of the same thing, the same conceptual space, the session is simply a persistent connection to a user. That session can be validated or invalidated. The process of logging in validates an existing session rather than being the establishing of the session itself. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Validating a session is a fairly easy thing to do. All you do is you keep a Boolean variable somewhere inside of your session is logged in. If it's true, then you can give the user elevated levels of privilege, show them different pages than they otherwise would be able to see. And if the user is not logged in, they're in logged out mode, which may have more or less features. It depends on what sort of application you're running. Does this make sense? Very good. So, with respect to the session variables themselves, what is our mantra in this class? Who do we never trust? We never trust the client. But here's a question. Does the session originate with the client? Sure. Does the client ever get to see it?
Isn't it in that cookie?
Well, the cookie, surely, yes. The client can see the cookie, but surely we are not foolish enough to store the state of our session in the actual cookie string value, right? The cookie is always what? What is a session cookie? Sorry? It's an encryption key. It's a series of randomized digits and letters, right? We talked about encryption last time on the board, right? So it's one of those. It's a cryptographically secure string. Does that give you the contents of the session?
No.
That's kind of the whole point, right? I mean, if we were to send, if, for example, in the session, we had a value that said, is logged in, and we sent that to the client, and the client can modify it and send it back, and we trust that, we've basically left the door open to every single person to trick our login check, right? Which is undesirable. So, how do we go about it then? Or, let me ask a different question. The state that's stored in the session superglobal, is that secure?
No.
No is a good gut response. But this is actually one of the very rare cases in PHP where you can actually trust the state of the session. The session, remember, is always internal to the web server. It doesn't contain anything that you yourself haven't put there. Now, if you're so ludicrously silly as to fail to filter an XSS attack, store that value inside of the session, and then echo the contents directly to the web page, I can't help you, right? But the state of the session itself is never seen by or touched by the user. There's no way for the user to modify it directly. Therefore, the stuff that we put in the session can be trusted. It can be trusted with the same level of trust that we invest our own variables with. Again, as in the case of our own variables, if I declare a variable and then I fail to filter, a get parameter, and there's an attack in that get parameter, and I store it into a variable, it's not that the variable is unreliable, right? I failed to filter from an unreliable source, right? The variable itself can be trusted so long as you're doing trustworthy things with it. The same is true of the session. The session is completely internal. It's one of the very rare cases where we can trust what's coming out of it. Does this make sense? Very good. So, any questions so far? You guys always have pretty good questions when you have questions. All right. So let's talk about regenerating our IDs. I seem to recall towards the end of class I said this is how you do it. We'll talk about this next time because we were running out of time. Session regenerate ID. Update the current session ID with a newly generated one. Using this frequently is a very good idea. It doesn't cost much. All it costs is generating a random number, updating the database entry with it, and when you send the updated cookie value, the old cookie ID that's being stored on the browser is overwritten with the new one. So what's the cost to doing this? Well, there's really not much. If you consider it this way, you might think, oh well, you know, I'm sending a lot more IDs over the network now. Say you regenerate your ID every single time a PHP script runs, right? You're sending your cookie value, your updated security code, through the HTTP packet every single time. Now, you know, one way to think about security is maybe I should minimize the amount that I'm sending secure codes around. You know, it provides a bit of a attack surface, right? But if we keep in mind the other side of that transaction, every single time the client is sending a request packet to the server, it is including its ID, right? It's including its secure ID because it needs that to start to open up the correct session on the server. So you're already doing it, right? So regenerating your session ID frequently means that not one of them is valid for an extended period of time, right? This is the main. This is where we're trying to reduce the amount of attack surface that someone might have against our web application. We want a ID to be valid for a short rather than a long amount of time. Consider our scenario last time where our hacker, our evil hacker, managed to steal a session cookie from some poor, sweet, defenseless old lady, right? In a situation where the ID is not being regenerated, the attacker can basically keep that cookie alive by continuing to send packets to the server to refresh the status of the database entry, right? So, basically, the session is hacked until one of the two of these people logs out, either the victim or the attacker, right? Whereas, if the session ID is regenerated, in all cases, it benefits the person who knows the password. Remember that a session cookie hijacking does not require that the attacker know the victim's password or login credentials, right? You've simply stolen a cookie, right? So, if the session ID is regenerated for the victim, the attacker's session cookie is expired, the code no longer works, the hacker is no longer, the attack has ended. The hacker can't get any further, right? You may think though, but if it's the hacker that gets the new cookie and it's the victim's cookie that's expired, doesn't that benefit the hacker? And the answer is, perhaps briefly, but the one thing that you need if you're a hacker is stealth, right? You're only in there so long as people don't know that you're in there. If the victim's account, or if the victim's session suddenly breaks and they're kicked out to the login screen, first of all, eyes narrow in suspicion. I didn't click out, log out. Why am I logged out? Why am I getting this error? If the victim is intelligent and knows what they're doing, and is perhaps maybe a little mad that they got logged out, the very next thing that they should do is log back in, right? Log back in and then change the password. Absolutely, change your passwords are like diapers. They should be changed frequently and for the same reason. They get really dirty over time. If you log back in and someone has your session, your former session ID, and if the server has been programmed intelligently, a fresh login should regenerate the session ID. Not only regenerate the session ID, but well, actually that's enough. It should regenerate the session ID. When that session ID is regenerated for the victim, suddenly the attacker's cookie is expired, right? So, let me give you some advice. If you are ever mysteriously logged out of an account for no reason, don't take that lying down. Go log back in as quickly as you can and change your password. You may only have minutes, right? Don't go and make yourself a cup of coffee, right? Because you are probably being hacked. Sound good? Good life advice? Yeah? Okay. Sounds good. This, incidentally, is the function that you use to do that. You don't even need to provide arguments. If you just call session regenerate ID, empty braces, by auto magic, it will regenerate the ID and you don't even have to think about anything else. Make sense? All good?
That's a warning.
What warning? Oh, currently. Oh no. Well, that's how it should work anyway. I'm alright. Okay. I'm going to test all of your programming sense. Alright? This box says, currently session regenerate ID does not handle unstable networks well, for example, mobile and Wi-Fi networks. Therefore, you may experience a lost session by calling session regenerate ID. What does that box actually say? this box actually says, I should be using a different language. That's not acceptable, PHP.
Does not handle unstable network, mobile and Wi-Fi networks, so most of them.
The overwhelming majority of them, yes. Yeah, I'm disappointed. So, you know, when you're writing a PHP application, please make sure that the only people who are allowed to connect to your server are on landlines. But everything I said about regenerating IDs in theory is still true, okay? The theory is still true. Okay. Alright. And I'm not sure if that means like, so I can speculate as to the reason for this. Probably what they're talking about with unstable networks is not all mobile and Wi-Fi networks, but unstable mobile and Wi-Fi networks. In such examples, packets are often lost, right? So probably what the problem is this thing is vulnerable to losing packets. It's probable that start session in the first place is vulnerable to losing packets. This is a warning, but it's probably not as severe as the big red box might lead you to believe, because most people will be established with reasonably stable connections, although, yeah, okay. Alright.
Hey.
Alright, anyway. Alright. I don't want to teach this course anymore. I want to teach the Node course. Please let me teach the Node course. Alright. So I've got a couple of videos, which I'm not going to show because we need to move on, but they're rather fun. This one, there you go.
Everyone's
Wait,
having
stop it. There we go. Sorry about that. This is one where he demonstrates how you go about stealing a cookie, which is fun. Or this is an explanation of cookies, and then the next one is yeah. Here we go. This one is about an they demonstrate like actual theft of a cookie, and there's an ad. Okay, stop it. Anyway, I don't have to demonstrate clicking a YouTube link for you. I don't know why I'm doing this. All right. So
That ad was brought to you by Power Cookies.
yes, yes indeed. And you know it's Walmart, and Walmart sells cookies, so maybe it was a cookie-based ad for cookies. You never know. Probably not. Walmart doesn't really advertise products; they just kind of advertise themselves. You know. But anyway, so so much for sessions. Any questions about sessions? Shall we talk about databases? Excellent. So, normally when I teach this course, this is my first semester teaching the database course as well, so like normally I have no idea what you folks know with respect to databases before I teach this topic, so I'm in a slightly better position to give you a slightly more informed lecture than usual this time. So here's the long and the short of it. You know how with the Mohawk Apps version of Microsoft Express Server, you have like your server process running in the background, and then you have the database management system that also loads, but they both load at the same time, so it looks like it's one application. And like if you like mentally block out the fact there's a connect to dialog, it looks like it's just one application, and you might as well be using like a really, really awful version of Excel, right? You guys know that, right? This is completely different. Completely different. Number one, We are connecting to a MySQL server. It is not guaranteed to be running on the same system as our machine, right? As our well, we'll get into it. So this is roughly the situation that we now are in. Try this one. So, recall back to your minds XAMPP, the way that XAMPP works. This might be good review. If this is my computer, inside of my computer, I have my browser application, which is a client, right? I have my little chrome wheel that looks a little bit like the radioactive symbol, right? Client. I also have my Apache web server. I think the symbol for Apache is a feather, isn't it? Yeah. There you go. This is a very, 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 very important thing to know. If you know nothing else about server programming after this class, at least learn this. Servers are software, not hardware, right? It is a software process. It is a piece of software that receives and transmits data packets, right? The type of data packets that a web server receives is, anybody? HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Very good. We are now introducing a third option, a third software process. I don't know what's even the symbol for MySQL. I don't even know. I'm just gonna write MySQL.
Dolphin.
Elephant? I thought that was Postgres.
A dolphin.
It's a dolphin.
A dolphin. Oh, I'm not
My
dolphin.
SQL.
A dolphin. Oh, I can't draw a dolphin. That's too much to ask. Although,
It's
if
just
I
basically like a line.
if I attempt to draw a dolphin, that might be even more humorous. All right, I will attempt to draw a dolphin. There you go. Dolphin have sharp teeth. They have sharp teeth. So MySQL. This is the XAMPP version, right? So this is how things run on XAMPP. All right? We now have a client and two server processes. Here's a question. Will the client connect directly to the database server? Not remotely. Why?
It's supposed to be a security issue, right? You don't want the
It is indeed.
client just pulling out like data that you want to keep secure.
So, in order to gain access to a database server, you require login credentials. It is a mistake to give your client login credentials to your database server, no matter how restrictive you have been about the level of access that that login has. It is a bad idea. With database servers, a thing that you can certainly do is you can create user accounts which have varying levels of privilege. If you want the user to only be able to perform select queries, that's a thing you can do. Maybe this user doesn't need to be able to modify tables. Maybe modifying tables is something that should be left to an administrator. It is a thing that should be left to an administrator, right? Nevertheless, by giving, do not give a client, don't give the client any kind of direct login access to the server, because if you do so, you are saying, hey client, I am giving you full permission to run SQL queries, and you shouldn't do that, because has anybody heard of an SQL injection attack? It's not even an attack at that point. You invited them. They don't even have to do an injection attack. They can just execute SQL on your server, right? They don't have to attack to get it there. You've given it to them. So, the server is a middleware layer, right? It is a middleware layer between the client and the server, and the database server, right? So, this is how things work. Client sends a request. Request is picked up by the socket layer. Socket layer, because this is XAMPP, bounces this back to the Apache web server. The web server says, this is going to require the database. So, the Apache web server fires off its own request to the database server, which then picks it up. Make sense? The Apache server itself is sending a request packet to the database server. The format for this packet is SQL. SQL has its own data format. HTTP is for web. SQL is for database access. Make sense? So, so when I say an SQL packet, I literally mean in terms of the data format. An SQL packet request is sent to the database server from the Apache web server. The SQL server then responds. That response is then sent back to the Apache web server. The web server may need to send several requests, right? It's a PHP script. You're allowed to send more than one request to the database server, right? So, there might be a few of these, but ultimately, the client is still waiting to hear back from the web server. So, in the end, sends it back, and I know that's a lot of lines. Maybe I should have done them in different colors, but that's how it works. Does this make sense? Very good. So let's make it a little more complicated. This is how things work in XAMPP. Let's consider how things are different when we are communicating over the internet. CS Unix. CS Unix will still have the Apache server, and it will have the MySQL server. I'm not going to do the topic yet. All right? So, the client initiates a request. This hits the socket layer. The socket layer says, this one's going out to the internet. So, that packet is launched into the web. It then bounces around a series of routers and switches like a little pinball, eventually arriving at CS Unix. It hits CS Unix's port infrastructure, socket layer, is directed to the Apache web server. In the case of CS Unix, the Apache server and the SQL server reside on the same machine. So, in the same way that the client here considers Apache to be running on localhost, and the Apache server here considers the database server to be running on localhost, the web server here considers the database to be running on localhost. The request packet for the SQL interaction hits the socket layer, bounces off of it into the same machine and into the database server. Right? It's located on the same machine. We are still bouncing off the socket layer, right? The database server is internal to the same machine that the web server is on. But when this guy returns its result, this result is then picked up by the Apache server. The Apache server then formulates its response, sends the response, that goes back into the internet, is received by the client machine and loaded by the client's browser. Does this make sense?
So it's basically the same?
The only difference
The basics
is
the same, but
this connection is now a connection through the tubes, right? On CS Unix, everything below the web server remains the same fundamentally as how XAMPP works. Make sense? Any questions? Okay. So let me make things slightly less complicated and slightly more complicated at the same time. All right? This is the way you do things if you run a small website, right? The more clients you accumulate, the more concurrent active users you have to deal with, the more hardware infrastructure you need. So let me ask you something. Do you think that the Facebook runs on one giant computer the size of a 14-story building, with a fan that would, put a fan so powerful that, they could put the wings on the thing and it could fly? Probably not. Distribution, right? Once things reach a certain size, you need to start taking machines minimally and giving them dedicated tasks. One of the things that you will find once you reach a certain size, your database the computer running your database server will need to be different from the computer running your web server. It simply won't be able to keep up with the packets, right? So, what you then have is you have a situation where up to the point where the Apache server sends out the request to the socket layer, everything remains the same. But once that request to the socket layer is made, rather than bouncing the packet back into the same machine to access a database running on localhost, that gets bounced back out into the tubes. That packet bounces around, eventually arrives at the database server that you have specified, normally with an IP address, because why would you DNS a database server? It's not meant for public access, right? You'll need an IP address, you'll need login credentials. It goes in, gets processed, response is made, response goes back out into the web, response is received, sent into the Apache server sends it to the client after processing it. So the bigger things get, the more this becomes an issue. Past a certain point, not just one web server or database server will do, right? You start needing multiples of all of these things, sometimes many multiples of all of these things. You can imagine the conglomeration that is required to run something like AWS, right? Which, perhaps I'll save some remarks about AWS, but and save some remarks about Microsoft Azure. Although, I will say a couple of things. I will say one thing. This is kind of like a true fact about reality, is like the more complicated something becomes, the easier it becomes to break it, generally speaking. So like, for example, consider the system that we use for transportation in this province or in this continent, right? How small an event does it take to completely take down the transportation network here, right? We had a good example of this a number of years ago in this city, right? One dump truck driver leaves his bucket up, hits a bridge on the Skyway, and for like the better part of a week, traffic is roads become almost unusable.
They all had to divert through locally, and that basically congested everything.
Yeah, it was impossible to get anywhere because people were having to divert. We were having to divert traffic through the city, which it's really not made for, right? And yeah, that's all it took, is one guy forgetting to put his bucket down, and it took out the transportation system in this part of the world for a week, right? When it comes to highly complex systems like this, first of all, it's kind of a miracle that anything works in the first place, But also, all it takes, as we found out with Microsoft Azure last week, and I think this is actually kind of ongoing, isn't it? Does anybody know? I was having a time with getting logged in this morning. I felt it was taking longer than it should have to get or that it normally did to get the two-factor authentication text, Anyway, all it takes is a few values in a configuration file being wrong, right? So, not to make too much of a meal out of this particular point, but right now I'm teaching a class called Tools and Practices, and in this class I'm in the middle of grading an assignment where people are using VI, which is a very sort of command line. I'm not going to say bare bones because it does a lot, VI does, but it does it in a very command line kind of way. Anybody here know or use VI? Vim? Anybody? VI. Vim is VI improved. Slightly more user-friendly, but VI is kind of the thing that thinks, you know, well, if you're not willing to learn me, then go to Nano, you peasant. But anyway, I'm marking this assignment, and like all of these, like a goodly chunk of the class, probably like 70% of them, have asked the chat algorithm how to perform the operation that is asked for in the assignment. And like all of them have given me this like really overly complex way of doing things using like a SED pattern, S-E-D. This is a Linux command. It's called, it stands for Stream Editor. It's a Linux command that's extremely powerful, but also extremely dangerous. And they've all given me like these complex SED commands that will perform the operations which are called for, which is like delete these 3 lines, right? And they've all given me like a global, like a thing that will globally destroy in the file any line that contains like the string Bob. And I've been giving them very poor grades for this because like you can't just indiscriminately delete things in configuration files, you nincompoops.
And you warned them not to do that, right?
Well, I didn't, in this case, it was, this was evil beyond my ken. I didn't realize that, like we did talk in class that like it is possible to run sed commands inside of VI. I didn't realize that that's what the chat algorithm would tell everybody to do incorrectly. Like you can really tell like who the people who paid attention are in class, because in VI, like literally the command that they were looking for was like DD3. If your cursor is on the right line, that deletes 3 lines, right? And instead they're giving me like G/ open Bob / Mary / John close / D, which is a sed command that this is a regular expression finding any instance of Bob, Mary, or John, and then deleting the whole line it occurs on, right? And I'm like, this is a class on Linux. I get to mark you down for that, because like, imagine doing something like that over like your operating system, you know? You'd brick the thing like that. But you know, in Linux, the motto of Linux is read the manual. So
basically they were amputating a leg when you had a sprained ankle.
yeah, yeah, basically. It was like, no, it wasn't even that. It was like, I was asking for the leg to be amputated. What I didn't expect is for the, wow, I was about to make a, ooh, I probably shouldn't say that joke.
Turn the camera off.
What things you're supposed to
Let's say I didn't intend for them to round up everybody in the classroom and amputate everyone's leg. All right. See, I'm working on that. I'm working on my filter, you know, which is what all of you should be doing in this class. Ha-hoy! So, do we understand this in concept? Right? So, in terms of practical details, there's gonna be an assignment where you're gonna develop it in XAMPP, and then you will have to port it to CS Unix. Right? We will discuss the details of how to do this. I will show you an example in class, but normally on the final assignment in this class, about 1/3 of people just kind of absolutely fall flat on their faces at the very first hurdle, which is getting the database to connect to to your web application on CS Unix, even if it connected on XAMPP. And if you can't manage to get that working, I can't do much for you in terms of a grade, because it means that nothing works. It's the same, for me, it's in the same category of things as a syntax error. You know, if I can't compile your assignment, it's not worth very much, is it? You know, I don't really care how much work you put into it, because I do not subscribe to the labor theory of value. Anybody who looks at how people actually work could not possibly subscribe to the labor theory of value, because it is absolutely true that people do negative work. People do work that costs other people more work. I consider that to be negative work. Mathematically speaking, I think that's justified. And I think people who do negative work should have to pay money instead of make money, you know? No, I don't. That's just a polemic. But that's okay. I'm trying to be funny. Always attempting, anyway. So, now we're going to talk about PHP. Yeah. So, unfortunately, we have to discuss some wibbly-wobbly stuff to do with PHP, the language, and its syntax for things. I know, but unfortunately we have to talk about how PHP handles objects. Dun dun dun! Answer? Not well, as you might expect. Now, this is kind of like a point that is also true in other languages. Python, I don't really care for the object system in Python. JavaScript, the way that JavaScript kind of used to work before they introduced Java, before they introduced Java-esque syntax for declaring classes in JavaScript, which, by the way, they introduced, I think, about 10 or 15 years ago. When they did that, it was a good attempt to fix a very bad situation, right? But basically, the problem is interpreted languages in general. Because you may say to yourself, how is it that I can even declare a class when the whole thing is being fed into an interpreter one line at a time? Shouldn't I have to pre-compile something in order to use the thing, right? Well, this is the way that it works. Classes in this group of interpreted languages, and this applies to Python, JavaScript, asterisk, like just plain old JavaScript, right? And also in PHP, right? The class definition must work fed one line at a time into an interpreter, right? So there's certain kinds of things that you can't have. There are certain nice things that you can't have, like type checking, basically. A lot of like the good solid type checking that Java does relies on the fact that I've loaded all of my class definitions and now I can check them for consistency. I can check usage to make sure it's consistent with the class definition. Some of you may remember from JavaScript this little pearl of wisdom. Anybody remember what happens if you enter this instead of that?
Doesn't it create a new property for that object called inner HTML lowercase?
It does. If you enter this, which is an obvious typo, into JavaScript, it creates a new property, inner HTML, with a lowercase t, m, and l. It does not produce an error. it does not produce a warning, it just does it. Why? Why is a good question. The reason that it does this is because it doesn't support having a rigid class definition that's preloaded. You must be able to build the thing up one statement at a time. The thing doesn't have the ability to say, that's not one of my properties, because at any point you can add more properties to it. Same thing with methods. That's the origin of this problem. How do you fix this problem?
You don't use JavaScript.
What do you use instead of JavaScript?
TypeScript.
TypeScript. This is why TypeScript. Do I need to show the graph? I'm going to show the graph. TypeScript, 43.6%. JavaScript is only at 66. How about professionals? Nearly half of all professionals answered TypeScript to the question. What is the question? Here it is. Which programming, scripting, and markup languages have you done extensive development work in over the past year, and which do you want to work in over the next year? All right? So TypeScript is tied with Bash. HTML isn't a programming language, and as we all know, SQL isn't a programming language. TSQL is a very bad programming language, but SQL itself is not a programming language. Take that one to your interviews, kids. Python is a programming language. But, basically in the top 3, what people consider programming languages and not scripting languages, you have JavaScript, Python, and TypeScript. And C# bringing up the rear with a pretty hefty gap, right? TypeScript. Everyone should be learning TypeScript. So, where was I? I was ranting about something. Oh yeah, how bad object-oriented is in PHP. So, when it comes to objects in PHP, there's no declarations of type, right? There's nothing nice or useful. This is what a class definition looks like in PHP. You declare a class with the word class. That much they got right. Class A is a collection of functions. You basically just define a function, and if you put it in a class, that's a class. I'm not even sure that they're called methods here, because they're declared with the word function. Do we have class functions? Right? Incidentally, that's actually, when it comes to, object-oriented, I think that the terminology they use in C++ is the preferred one. I prefer that way of talking about it to the Java way of talking about it, because in C++, the functions contained in a class are called member functions. And it might be a little bit more clunky to say than method, but at least you know what you're talking about. It's a member function. It's a member of the class. And what do they call instance variables? They call them member variables. So, yes.
I don't think we can see the oriented page here. We cannot access the page.
Oh, is it? Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
At least I was looking for it, and I couldn't.
Yeah, I probably just need to publish it. Yep. Boop. There you go, you should be able to get it now. Oh, don't do that, you silly, stupid thing. There you go. Exercises. You can see I have quite a few computer file videos attached to this one. Watch most of those at your pleasure. But we'll be talking about some of them. I might even show one or two of them in class. So, most of the improvements that I've made to the course shell on this run were adding links to computer file videos. So, to declare an instance of a class, you use the new keyword, call the class name as a function. This is generally how things work in Python, except in Python you don't use the new keyword. You just call the function as you call the class as a function, and that creates it. So, constructors and destructors. Basically not completely dissimilar from Java. A constructor is a function that has a specific name. In this case, the specific name is, that's two underscores, folks. Underscore, underscore, construct. That is your constructor. Underscore, underscore, destruct is your destructor. This is not a million miles off of the way that Python does it. In Python's case, your constructor is called underscore underscore init. But at least here, it doesn't also require you to provide a name for a self-reference. Python does that. Okay, I have to compare this with Python now. Yeah. So this, let me just copy this to Notepad so you can see it. I appreciate the spy goggles in the back of the room, but I should also just, if that's your way of telling me to increase the magnification, I could just increase the magnification. So this is how something similar looks in Python. Of course, no curly braces. Def instead of function, as is Python. Underscore, underscore, init, underscore, underscore. That is what the constructor is called. It takes arguments name and age, which are being bound to self.name and self.age. But what is the purpose of self? Does anybody know enough Python to answer?
Take a guess, maybe. It's like this.
It is like this. Yeah, that is exactly what it is. Except you get to call it whatever you want for some reason, and you have to put it here. Every method that you declare in Python requires that you name the self-reference as the first argument of the method. Why does it do this? I do not know. There are a lot of strange things about the way that Python does stuff, though. Let's see. Can I just Can I do something in the W3 Schools interpreter for just a moment? All right. Okay. Oh wow, you will need the spy goggles for that. Good grief. Boop. There you go. That's better. You can see that at the back. Better. Good. Okay. So the way that you get stuff, I suppose it was premature of me to do that. Using dot notation, right? So how do you make stuff private in Python? Anybody know? Get this, guys. You prepend the variable name with 2 underscores, and that makes it private. Not only that, you have to do that every time you use it in the class. It's a part of the identifier. Yeah. You thought PHP was bad. Got a load of Python. Yep, there you go. Person object has no attribute. Age.
Let me guess. If you want to implement a class, get a class into a PHP script that is not inside that script, you have to use the include and they require a thing to implement it, right?
I must be very clear, this is Python, not PHP.
I
Yeah.
know, but I know that that's Python, this is PHP. But
Yeah, I don't even know how to make things private in PHP. I'd have to look it up. It's probably something like this though. So, here's a question. If it's part of the identifier, can I do that? No, you can't do that. However, little known fact. In Python, every object has a sub-object called dictionary. Underscore, underscore, dict, underscore, underscore. Oh, it's hanging on the air. Stupid bloody thing. I hate Python.
So in the lookup, it says for PHP, you actually declare private and then the variable.
Oh, okay, good. Then it's an improvement over this. So I'd like to show you this, all right? Dictionary. This is what the printed dictionary looks like. Anybody notice anything about the way that age has been written?
Wait.
I'll give you a moment for it to sink in. And you must be saying to yourself, this couldn't possibly be the way that it's storing a private variable, right? Just as a regular one, with the class name and 1 underscore prepended to it? That can't possibly be true. You ready to have your minds absolutely blown?
That is awesome.
Much private.
What's the point of making it
Literally,
And it's Python. So, it doesn't even check to make sure you're preserving its type. So, what's the point of a private variable in Python then, if it's, there's no actual security? Well, if you want the most charitable case possible, all security is a series of locked doors to which it's, more or less difficult to open it. That's it. That's all that security is. If you think about a Java program, if you're a developer on a Java program, what is preventing you from going into somebody else's source code, modifying a private variable to a public variable, and then, violating security that way? The answer is people reviewing your code on a pull request. That's what prevents that sort of nonsense. But So what's the point of this? What's the point of privacy? And you want to know something? I have talked to Python enthusiasts about this, and I have brought this up, and I have asked them, how can you possibly say that this is an object-oriented language? Because it doesn't even understand what privacy is supposed to be. Like, if you did this, like, hid the dictionary so that it couldn't be read, and then chose like a cryptographically secure random string here, you'd have a system. But not this. And this is the response I get. This is normally the stock response I get. Well, why do you need private in the first place? And it's like, I don't think we can continue to have this conversation because I'm just going to get angry. So there you go. Python is bad. Empirically proven. They run servers on that language. Of course, they also run servers on PHP. So there you go. So yeah, that's the territory that we're in with classes. So why are we even talking about classes? Oh wait, no, I've got more fun stuff for you before we talk about what the point of this is. If I haven't sufficiently destroyed your souls, here we go. How do we access members of a class in Python? Well, we don't use dot syntax because what's dot syntax used for in Python, or in PHP? What was it, sorry? Concatenation, yes. And PHP, it's a specific design thing, it's a design decision they made that an operator should only do one thing. Until that's no longer feasible. But that's their design decision, is an operator should only do one thing. Dot means concatenation. So, what do we replace dot with? Single line arrow.
Makes sense, but it doesn't make it any better.
Yes, so it's interesting, the the etymology of the single line arrow in this context. It actually derives from C. However, it's a little bit complicated and involves pointers. So, I'm going to say the next 3 or 4 sentences, and if it sounds like just radio static to you, don't worry about it. But in C, there's no such thing as a class, but you can declare structures. Structures are collections of variables. C has a thing called a pointer. The value of a pointer is the memory address at which something else resides in system memory. So you can have pointers to structures, right? There is a specific operation for turning a memory address into the thing that it's pointing to. This is called pointer dereferencing. So if I have a pointer to a structure, I must dereference the pointer in order to travel through memory to the point in memory where the structure is held. Then, once I'm inside the structure, I presumably want some value out of it, So you access values out of structures in C using dot syntax. This is where it comes from, right? In C, if you combine pointer dereferencing with field access in a structure, that is the operator that you use for that. Pointer dereferencing plus field access. So that's where it comes from. Technically, it's correct because, PHP also thinks of the $ as being a memory dereferencing operation, right? Which is why when you're accessing elements of an object in PHP, you put a $ at the beginning, but at no point further than that, because you are dereferencing the object and then calling a method from the dereferenced object. So yeah, C is a very interesting language in that it has those kinds of eccentricities, but also like C also thinks of like the like array access as being a pointer dereferencing operation. So like if I have an array at 3, this is actually, A is a pointer, so it might be pointing to like address 800 in memory. This corresponds to A plus 3 times size of type, whatever the type is, right? And then you dereference it. So this is actually the reason why 0 indexing, right? So in C, the this address is the first cell of memory of the array. So it is literally, it's array dereferenced at offset 0. So like if you wanted to formally state the array access operator, its like technical name is memory offset plus dereference. That's what it is. It's a memory offset on a pointer, and then you dereference the offset, and that's what that actually is, like in C. But of course, you know, who programs in C? Everyone should learn C because it's basically like C holds the same position among programming languages that Latin does among European languages. It's the language that all of the rest of them were either heavily influenced by or directly based on. So, anywho. Alright, so why am I telling you all of this? You may be terrified now that I'm now going to expect you to write a bunch of PHP objects on the exam and that this course just turned into Java. But no, don't worry. I'm not actually going to require you to write PHP objects. We're going to require you to use them. Basically, the whole point of that was single line arrow to get stuff out of an object. And yes, there are objects. But I think that objects weren't introduced until PHP version 5. Yes?
Can you do like polymorphisms and that?
Well, the thing about polymorphism is like, because you're already in a loosely typed interpreted language, everything is so like polymorphic to begin with that like, you know, even like your regular standard mechanisms of polymorphism are going to be probably sufficient for your needs. You know, like you don't have to overload methods because you can just declare them with optional arguments with default values, right? This is the way that JavaScript gets around having to declare things multiple times, right? You don't really have to, like, basically there are loose bad ways of doing everything that you did formally in Java, right? Like if you want, you can like write a function. Okay. Let's say you wanted to do some kind of like simple inheritance, right? It actually works to just write a function that like adds or overwrites all of the definitions that are necessary to do the inheritance. So you can kind of like implement inheritance yourself because there's nothing preventing you from adding things to an object after it's been created, right? And you may understand that that is a terrible, terrible thing to do, and why would you ever do that? And yes, yes, indeed. Yeah. So, all right. Is there anybody here who's not taking databases right now? Okay. There's a bit here where you have, like, there's a review of of database concepts, which I am going to skip because we've been doing that already. Y'all know what select, you guys know all of these, right? We've done these, all right? CRUD operations, right? It turns out that when you hook these things up to a web application, you really strongly don't have to do anything fancy to get some really like very cool functionality out of it. So like even basic CRUD operations carry you a very long way when you're building a web application. Okay? Yep. You guys have done primary and foreign keys to death, I'm sure. So this is the whole point. So you know how like I got a little narky about people not using filter input correctly? This is like that as well, but possibly even more so. So there are old bad ways of doing databases. There are new good ways of doing databases. The PHP data object is the new good way of doing databases. If you're going to use the chat algorithm to do this part for you, read it before you submit it, right? I do not condone use of the chat algorithm for things that you should be training your brain to do, but if you're going to use it, at least read what it gives you. Basically, the PHP data object, when used correctly, is your best defense against SQL injection attack. If you don't use it, you are using old bad methods that are vulnerable to SQL injection attacks. SQL injection attacks are a big deal. They are the number one, like, in terms of cyber attacks, the ransomware attacks are starting to get up there, but just the plain old simple SQL injection attack is still the, like, heaviest loss to cybersecurity that companies and organizations experience, right? You hear about these sorts of hacks every day. Whenever you hear, well, perhaps not every day, every week, every month, you hear about a big one. When a company sends around an email that says something like, we've had a data breach and a bunch of account details were stolen, it's been an SQL injection attack. Hands down. The purpose of an SQL injection attack is to breach the database, to get information out of the database that should not, that the person has no right or access to. Databases often hold confidential details, right? There was one like, last week I was talking to Gilbert about it. Toys R Us, I think it was. Toys R Us had a data breach like a couple of weeks ago and sent emails around being like, guys, we had a data breach, go change your passwords, right? This is how many users may have been affected. And it's like, he said that, he talked to his class, like, what do you think about the company now after hearing that there's been a data breach? And one person in the class was like, oh, I'll never use them again. And it's like, yeah, but like I understand it, but at the same time, they told you about it. There's a lot of the stuff that goes on where you don't hear about what's going on, right? like a company that's trying to get out in front of the problem is at least being proactive, or, yeah, they're at least being, you know, responsibly reactive to the situation, even if the situation occurred in the first place. And like, data security is hard, you know, like we have, like it is a legitimate profession to just be a person who goes into organizations and tells them, listen, your security practice is wrong, you should do this, you should do that, you should do this. Security consultants make a lot of money, actually, because it's a big problem. And, you know, good grief. You guys are the front line, though, right? You guys, in this class, we are learning to write the middleware layer that connects users to databases. When attacks get through, they get through us, right? The programmers. So it's very important for us to use current security practice, right? I have said about the chatbot before. The articles that it has ingested to produce answers to your assignment problems are old in a lot of cases, sometimes 15 to 20 years old, which is, you know, one might say this course is old, but it's not that old. All right? You must use current security practice.
Also, trusting the chatbot, which hallucinates quite frequently to write your security, is kind of horrific.
I mean, there was a good example about of this. I think over the summer this happened, but there was a social media startup which I think was called Tea Party or Teacup or something like that. So this social media, I am convinced, although I haven't heard this officially and this has not been confirmed, but I have, I've convinced myself in my brain that the reason all of these security problems happened was because they were using the chatbot to write their code for them, because nobody who knows anything would have done these things, right? Like, it's either the chatbot or like someone who's phenomenally bad at their job, right? Like, I might be charitable to someone to say it was the chatbot, because if it was them, it's like, oh boy. So one of the things that I heard about this social media site, it was like, in theory, somewhat privacy oriented, like certain, I think it was like only for women or something like that, so like they were, you know, sometimes websites use like facial recognition to determine whether or not you're a woman if it's for women only, which itself is like a source of a whole host of problems, right? It's like, how do you know that the picture they gave you was of them, for example? But, you know, all that aside, apparently what this website did was they took like the profile pictures, which were required because they were doing facial recognition, and they just put them in a publicly accessible folder on the server. So literally, all you had to do was like navigate to you know that page that that Apache gives you when there's no index page? Like, go to that and click the link and you could get the photos of every single person who was using the app. Now I ask you, is that data security? No.
Data security.
Yeah, that is, if it is anti-security, you know? But, you know, that's just one, that's an interesting recent example. You know, some of my favorite examples of data breaches on websites. Oh man, you guys hear about 23andMe? You guys know what that website? I don't know if they're defunct yet.
DNA, like, sequencing?
Yeah, so this is the whole shtick, right? You spit into a cup, you give them $200 and the cup full of your spit, and they tell you whether or not you were related to Hitler, basically. Or Mussolini or Stalin or whoever. Right? They tell, it's like, you know, here's your genome, here's, you know, you're like ethnically this or a that, or you're susceptible to having a slightly larger nose than other people, or some like genetic traits. You might be genetically susceptible to hemophilia or something like that. And it's like, I don't know why anybody would do this. If it becomes relevant, our own medical system is well capable of sequencing your genome to tell you what your what genetic diseases you might have or pass on to potential or existing children. This is a thing the medical establishment already does. You shouldn't have to pay for it, right? Well, that's the thing, right? It's like you are taking my genome, and my genome is now subject to an end-user license agreement. No, thank you, right? I saw a recent XKCD cartoon. It was like Satan walks into a room, and he's like, "I'm here for your soul." And then there's a sign. He says, "Read the sign." And there's a sign in the room that says, "By entering this room, you agree to forfeit your own soul instead of taking the soul of the person you were here to take." And it's like, that's not fair. It's like, yeah, you got to read the end-user license agreement. It was true in the 90s that if a person read all of the contractual language they agreed to by using software, it would occupy 2/3 of the year. And that was the 90s, right? The end-user license agreement is a scourge on the planet. But, now we're in a situation where people's DNA is governed by it, right? So yeah, there was a data breach, and now a lot of people's genomes are on the dark web, right? Because that's where all of this data ends up, right? So now it's not just like big corporations that can buy your genetic information legitimately. A bunch of hackers have your genetic information as well. Here's another good one. Are any of you familiar with the website Ashley Madison?
Oh, yes.
What's it do?
If I remember correctly, it's like a dating site for people who are committing adultery. So like.
That's precisely what it is, yes.
Apparently there's a lot of users in Ottawa.
Well, I wouldn't care to comment one way or another about, local demographics and website usage. But it's a website for people who are interested in committing adultery. First of all, don't commit adultery.
World smells wild over here.
And if you are going to commit adultery, don't do so over the internet. Because, as my mother always said, never write anything down that you wouldn't want anybody else on the planet to read. So, they got breached. And a lot of users got blackmailed. Because having an affair is a thing you blackmail people over, and that's like a tradition going like all the way back to the Roman Empire, so, or probably further. So it's probably been a thing so long as there's been people, probably back when people were hunting mammoths, they were blackmailing each other over adultery. But yeah, so that was a data breach, SQL injection attack, and that's a problem, right? SQL injection attacks are a problem, a serious problem, so please take it with all due seriousness. And if I see anybody not using the PDO object to do their database access, I shall be severely cross. Don't expect a good grade on the assignment. So, how are we doing for time? Okay. Behold, this is the connection code. This is the block of code that you will copy and paste into everything. Please bookmark it. All right? Write it down somewhere. So, let's go through it in some detail. Where's my sword? There it is. A laser sword made of plastic. Plastic lasers. So, first of all, at the very top level, we may notice something that we didn't even think that PHP did. What? PHP has exception handling? You wouldn't know it, would you? For the amount of its functions returning false, you wouldn't know it had exception handling. The answer to this query is that PHP only fairly recently received support for exception handling, and many of its rather old clunky functions do not use exception handling for historical and legacy reasons, which is a great thing to say in a class. As always with PHP, doing things well and safety is not the default, you know? So the PDO object though, being a class and being an object and being like the one thing that we're going to study in this course that somebody made an attempt at doing correctly, actually does raise exceptions when things happen. So this is the line that establishes the connection. If the connection cannot be established, an exception is raised. Also, avoid using die in production code. So, I know, why is it there in the first place? Echo the error and then exit probably 0. If you can't connect to the database, if the server cannot connect to the database, that's not likely a problem with the server, that's likely a problem with either the network or the database server, right? Although, that's also an interesting intellectual exercise. Why might a connection to a database server fail? What sort of things could cause this line to produce an exception? Any guesses?
Incorrect password?
Did you also say incorrect password?
No,
Okay. Incorrect password is correct. What were you going to say?
it just doesn't exist in the first place.
Yes, it does. Well, yes, doesn't exist in the first place. So I'll generalize that to say you're looking in the wrong place for it, right? If you've not specified a correct host name, then the packet can't find its destination, whether or not the server physically exists. What were you going to say?
I was going to say that maybe your ID or password no longer exists.
Yes, the password no longer, something to do with the login account. Yes. Anybody else?
Maybe you did something silly and actually created your own PDO class that shadows the base.
Oh, that would be exceptionally silly, yes. Let's assume that's not the case, though. So, it's also just sometimes the case that packets are just plain lost, right? It's not guaranteed when you send a request packet that you receive a response for any one of a host of networky type reasons, right? The network can just drop the packet, as I'm sure, or, the server could be Azure and could be experiencing problems like Azure was having last week. Connectivity issues as well. One other thing though, when we connect to the database server, we must also specify the name of the database, right? So a database server may have many different actual databases running, or that are accessible from it. If we consider our experience with Microsoft server, right? The CHDB is but one of several databases that we had, most of which were there from previously because of obvious security considerations that should be considered. Obvious security problems that should be addressed. So the SQL server will have several databases. You connect to one of them, right? If you think about the SQL queries that we've been doing so far, not one of them has used the name of the database in it except for use this database, right? The select queries always specify a table, but assume a database, right? Question?
Would the exception message be different depending on if it failed to connect to the database entirely or if the ID or password were wrong?
Absolutely, that's the purpose in printing it. You will get different messages depending on which types of errors occurred. It's useful to know what type of error occurred. A failure to connect or a connection timeout is not really something you can do anything about, you know, unless like you have forgotten to launch the SQL server in XAMPP, right? If you're on CS Unix and you're getting a connection timeout, there's really not much you can do about it. But if it's complaining that your password's wrong, that's something you can do something about. Yes, absolutely. Good question, thank you. Any other questions? So, would you like to see the world that you could be living in? Shall we see what a MySQL server looks like? Well, we can see what the database management system looks like anyway, with the remaining time in class. So, MySQL is the second option there under Apache. If we click Start, and it starts. Yay! Don't worry about that. Just click Cancel and it still works. Once the server is running, you have the admin button. If you click on this, it takes you to localhost 1080 phpMyAdmin. Ooh, site can't be reached. Oh yeah, I have to have the web server running too. Boop. Web server. There we go. Boop. There we go. This is phpMyAdmin. This is the database management system for the MySQL installation we will be using in this class. It is a little bit different from the Microsoft one. For one thing, it's not pretending to be an Excel spreadsheet. This quick tutorial, along this bar, you will find your list of databases. We will be creating a new one. All of these are, basically for internal use by the MySQL server. One of these, for example, is how you authenticate users, right? The user login system, which is used, is in one of these things. You'll notice that this, despite the fact we clicked MySQL, this is actually running MariaDB. You've also got our username is root at localhost. So this is one of the things that you will find is necessary to change once you port to CS Unix. On XAMPP, your login credentials are root and an empty password. On CS Unix, it's your CS Unix username plus a password which has been already stored in your accounts. I'll show you how to find it another day. So, if you wish to create a database, you click New. Give the database a name. Whatever. Doesn't matter. There you go. We now have a whatever database. You want to create a table. Credentials. Number of columns, 2. Go! I need a table to like show you guys stuff. So, username, password, type varchar, length 50, right? You can define what the default value is, something you define null or the current timestamp. Collation, don't worry about that. We're not gonna get super heavily into it. We're not gonna poke around as much of it as we do with Microsoft. Index, primary, you can imagine what that is. Unique, index, this is where you set something as having an index. In particular, this one is a little scary looking, but it doesn't mean artificial intelligence. AI means auto increment. So if you have a primary key, that's, if you have a column defined as a primary key and you set it to auto increment, you never have to include it in an insert operation. It will always it basically sets it up as having an N1, right? A meaningless but unique number. Just sequential numbers, right? So it'll take care of that for you. But yeah, this is enough for now. There we go. This is your table view. With it, you view your table. You have an SQL tab. Here you may enter SQL queries. Technically speaking, you're using a slightly different version of SQL here, right? But everything is sufficiently similar that you should be able to adapt without too much pain. The way that it handles dates, I think, is a little bit different than the way that Microsoft handles dates, but pretty much everything should be roughly in place. So, if I want to insert some values for username and password, username, Mr. Krabs, password, money. There you go. And you can see, here we have it, your username, stuff is stored in the table, right? There's an insert dialog, but I find it, I tried using it the other day and it inserted a row twice, which I find the SQL box a little more reliable, Import and export. This is how you load and upload SQL files. So export will take all of your database and produce an SQL file from it, including all of the data. It backs up the database. Import takes one of those files and constructs the database from it. Right? We're going to go through examples of how to do all of this eventually, but I just wanted to give you a quick look around before we break for today. 'Cause, what do you think? You don't? Okay. I'm not. Don't worry about offending me. Do you like the look of this better than Microsoft?
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah, okay, good. At the very least, there won't be any invisible drop-down menus that you have to click on. Good work, everybody. Thank you very much for your time and attention today. We shall resume Wednesday. And maybe we might even do some code.